Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, brought to you as always by Inside the Penguins, a proud affiliate of the Hockey News. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat, and it's been an interesting week in Penguins land. Of course, assistant coach David Quinn officially hired by the Pittsburgh Penguins yesterday, but today's episode, we're going to focus on some younger players in the Penguins organization. A little bit later, we'll be joined by Jacob Punturi, a contributor for Inside the Penguins. He recently put out his top 10 prospects in the Pittsburgh Penguins system. We're going to interrogate him a little bit, Horwat. We're going to try to get to the bottom of some of these prospects and what his opinions are on how far away they are and what they could do once they get over to North America for some of them, and for others, what they can do if they get to the NHL level as early as next season. So we had a fun conversation with Jake, but before we get into that, it is US Open week. Tiger Woods is on Pinehurst right now, tearing it up. We have a golf story that pertains to the Pittsburgh Penguins that I wanted to lead off with today. Sam Lafferty, his career has taken off since being traded by the Penguins. Most recently, 13 goals and 24 points for the resurgent Vancouver Canucks in the 2023-24 season. And now it seems as if he's getting an opportunity on the golf course, and not just typical off-season, I'm better than you, sandbagger with spitting chicklets type of golf. He's participating in the vaunted Sunny Hannah Amateur this weekend in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Now, why is that important? One, because I'm from Johnstown, so obviously it popped up on my feed. And two, because it's a U.S. Open qualifier. The winner of this tournament will go to the U.S. Open in 2025 at Oakmont Country Club in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, unfortunately, it does look unlikely that Sam Lafferty makes it to there because he finished round one in dead last after shooting a 91, which is 21 over par. And, while he's not having a great tournament there, it's still interesting that a former Penguin is back in Western PA, obviously a Hollidaysburg native, getting his amateur golf career off on the wrong foot, unfortunately, but still, interesting story.
That's about what I would shoot, maybe even a little over if I'm having a really good day.
Yeah.
Because I'm prone to going over 90, but I try and keep it under that as much as I can. Apparently, you've been reading my scores on the app I use that I need to stop using because my watch is not connected to my phone anymore. That being said, good for him for at least doing that. We know hockey players are incredibly skilled or into golf and love making that their off-season activity. At least most of them do, I think. There's a ton of talk about who like the best golfer in the NHL is. I believe it's Joe Pavelski. At least he was the most recent winner of that selection. Former Penguin Justin Schultz was also up there as one of the better golfers in the league. Incredible stuff. And seeing this sort of jive from Sam Lafferty is quite fun, especially considering that he's starting to really make a name for himself a bit more in the NHL, a bit more in the league as a solid regular NHL player, especially considering the season he just had with Vancouver. And it should be good stuff to go forward in his NHL career. I'm impressed to see, even if he finished last or his first round, finishing last in that tournament, it's still more than most people can't say. They competed in a tournament like that they had a crack at it. And let's say he strung together 18 good holes. Suddenly we're having the discussion of, well, he's going to be a semi-local, he's local enough, a local former NHLer, or still current, what am I saying, former? Current NHLer competing in the U.S. Open at Oakmont, which I got the email about getting early access tickets to that, and oh my God, I'd have to take out a mortgage on a house I don't own. So we'll see whenever general admission comes out for that. But it's good on him, and I can't wait for, regardless if he's there or not, can't wait for the U.S. Open next year.
Yeah, it's going to be, it's a nice little story there for Sam Lafferty, but to make it more interesting for people that are more hockey centric viewers here, Lafferty is an unrestricted free agent this season, right? I mean, July 1st, he's available for 32 NHL franchises. Could you see the Penguins potentially reaching out to him while he's in town and saying, hey, we have some interest in bringing you back into our bottom six fold, especially with the Penguins looking to get a little bit chippier, a little bit greasier in the bottom six. Obviously, that's something Sam Lafferty has excelled at in his NHL career, but bringing that 10 to 15 goal scorer back in, bringing somebody with a little bit of, a little bit of stank, a little bit of little bit of grit and grime. Do you think the Penguins should reach out and have Lafferty on their radar as a potential option on July 1?
I don't really know, and I don't think so. Usually, more often than not, I'll stand by running it back with old faces doesn't work as well.
Mm-hmm.
It would depend on where Sullivan, excuse me, all of a sudden wanted to put him. Like now it's okay, he's going to do this, this, and this, and this instead of what it was before. I doubt it. I doubt something would change with that. And also just the way the Penguins are structured so far. We look at their roster, we look at the names that could crack the lineup, and we talk about a couple of them coming up in the interview here. It just doesn't seem feasible to add another name, add another log to that fire, unless obviously trades still might happen with certain names above a guy like Lafferty on a hypothetical depth chart. But it just wouldn't make sense at the moment as I sit here right now on June 13th.
Yeah, the pros to it are the fact that it's going to be a short-term deal. It's not going to be hyper expensive. Yep. So I don't hate the idea of bringing him in, but bring him in for a role of, hey, you're guaranteed a spot or you're guaranteed to be at the NHL level at least. I don't know about that because like you mentioned, how many roadblocks do you want to put ahead of some of these talented youngsters that Kyle Dubas is saying that he's going to try to get into the lineup sooner rather than later. But I don't hate bringing in Sam Lafferty if you're bringing him in on a Vinny Hinostroza type role. Like, hey, if they're not ready, you will get NHL playing time. If they are ready, you better learn Northeast Pennsylvania ease, buddy. Like, you're going to be playing for the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. But I think Lafferty's at a place in his career where, at least as of right now, especially at 29 years old, he's looking for that one last opportunity to make a big payday, maybe a 1 or 2 year contract to try to have great seasons and make as much money at the National Hockey League as possible. So maybe Pittsburgh is not the best option for Sam Lafferty, but if they're able to get him on that Vinny Hinostroza type deal, I think he fits the mold pretty well. Certainly like him a little bit more than I liked Jansen Harkins. I like him a little bit more than I liked Emil Bemstrom. I like him a little bit more than I liked Radim Zohorna. But again, is he going to be willing to come in for that type of role, for that type of opportunity? No, I think there's going to be a better opportunity somewhere else for Sam Lafferty. So probably likely that he leaves Pennsylvania again once July 1st rolls around and he finds a new home, if he doesn't end up going back to the Vancouver Canucks, because we know if there's anybody that likes recycling their former players, it is Patrick Allvin, Jim Rutherford, and the Vancouver Canucks. But let's close out this quick little segment here before we send it over to our interview with Jacob Punturi with a fun off-season segment pertaining to golf, because both me and you are avid golf watchers and avid golf players as well. The question is, which current or former Penguins would you want in your dream golf foursome? So you and 3 other Penguins, current or former, who would you take, Horwat?
You got to start with Lemieux. I just think out of A, you got the stories. B, you have the skill of golf. His son also just won some amateur thing, Austin, not too long ago. I forget what it was now. But then you also have the history of Lemieux and golf, which is the tournament. Oh, the Lemieux charity tournament that needs to come back, because it's been ages and ages and ages. I remember going to it as a young child though. That's just a fun thing that needs to come back for this. A, the city of Pittsburgh, B, for the Pittsburgh Penguins, especially now that golf is growing the way it is. That would just be a fun event for the town, for the team, and for the sport. So I think he's the easy option, number 1. Easy option number 2 is Sidney Crosby, and I'll just have to roll with it. Again, a skilled player on the golf course. Lefty, by the way. That's a southpaw golfer. Not too much more detail into that. But a third one, I would need a vibes pick, because those Lemieux and Sid are there to really golf and have some competition. Listen, I'm pretty decent at golf myself, but I am done with the idea of I'm here to compete. I played high school golf and I don't like competing in golf. So I like just kind of going, having a good time, having a little competition, friendly competition. So I would need a vibes selection. And given that video that the Penguins put out last year, the entire team golfing, I'm going with Evgeny Malkin. He just doesn't seem like the best, but is out there to have fun and is always rooting for his buddy Chad Ruedel.
So you're going with 3 of the 4 Mount Rushmore of Pittsburgh Penguins hockey.
Of course I am. They're basic answers, but just absolutely, like I said, those 2 are going to, Sid and Lemieux are going to compete. I just need the vibes pick. I got to share a cart with somebody who's just here for the vibes.
Oh, I got a vibes pick on I got two vibes pick on mine, but also two guys that are known to be pretty good golfers as well. But first and foremost, I'm gonna look over in your homework a little bit and cheat. I'm gonna bring in Sidney Crosby because the more time you can spend with somebody that has been that historically good in the organization, the more stories that you can glean upon from a guy like that, you're going to. Not to mention the fact that you mentioned it. I mean, it's Sidney freaking Crosby. Of
Mhm.
course, I'm going to put him in my threesome. But also, the other two are vibes picks. They're guys that have seen a lot in their NHL careers. They've seen a lot outside of their NHL careers. And one of them, well, let's just say he's eating hot dogs off of a green outside of the Stanley Cup. I'm bringing in Phil Kessel because, what is better than golf and Phil Kessel, right? You talk about vibes, you talk about personality. Phil has seen a lot. You could talk a little bit about his time in Toronto. You can talk about, you know, being held off the Olympic team and stuff like that. You can talk about all these different things, not to mention the fact he's pretty good around the links. So I'll take Phil Kessel, I'll take Sidney Crosby, and I'm going to take the king of stories in Pittsburgh. I'm taking Phil Bourque, another lefty as well. I mean, Borky, I read his book, and I
Mhm.
believe it's behind me still. If it's not behind me, it's on the bookshelf over there. But I read his book. I believe it was If These Walls Could Talk or something like that. The stories of the Pittsburgh Penguins. He has so many stories from the early 90s. He's been around the team basically as long as, you know, the Penguins have been contenders,
Mhm.
right? He's been around the team since the 90s, and he's stayed around the team as a member of the broadcast team. And now, there's obviously reports that he might be a full-time member of the television team next year, which is, I think, great for the Pittsburgh Penguins and great for, fans of the Pittsburgh Penguins as well. But I'd love to get some stories off the record from Phil Bourque because everything he's put on the record has been highly, highly entertaining. So my foursome goes me, who sucks at golf. You say that, you typically try to shoot under 90. I typically, if I can get into the double digits, that's a great round for me. I typically am around 103, 104, but playing around with Sidney Crosby, Phil Kessel, and Phil Bourque, there's just a lot of stories that I would love to be able to just listen to. Not even
Mhm.
for like podcast purposes, to just hear and be a part of. 18 holes with those three would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and like I said, and I'm also not one that likes drinking on the golf course. So
Hmm.
it's not like we'd get hammered. That's like me and Gino would get hammered out there, but like I said, it's good vibes out there. Golfing's just fun. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter. You're gonna get good vibes from Sid because he's an awesome human being as well. But you just know that competition's gonna come out of him a little bit,
Oh, yeah.
and Mario's there to facilitate. And again, you're gonna get all kinds of stories from Mario if
Mhm.
you get him in the right mindset. And he's an avid golfer. He's an avid man on the links. So it's a fun situation. I like this little homework assignment we had.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna lie, and you can dispute this if you want, and let us know in the comments who your dream foursome is as well. But I feel like I'm gonna get better Mario stories out of Phil Bourque than you would actually get from Mario.
That's fair too. Yeah, no doubt. No doubt, because Phil
So
Bork has just the stories from everything.
everything,
He'll have stories of the Penguins before he even got here.
yeah,
Like,
because people just talk to him.
yeah, Phil,
People are open with him, like the Kevin Stevens stories, the Jaromir Jagr stories. They're all in Phil Bourque's brain. So to be able to unlock them for about 4 hours, that would be some fun times there. So
yeah.
fun little exercise. Like I said, let us know in the comments. But we're going to take a quick break here. When we return, joined by Jacob Punturi, contributor for InsideThePenguins.com, and talking about the top 10 Penguins in the prospect system. We'll talk about that right after the break. Welcome back to the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, brought to you as always by Inside the Penguins. We're joined now by contributor for Inside the Penguins, Jacob Punturi. You can follow him on X at Jake Atspy with an underscore in between the two there. He put out a nice piece last week, I should say, detailing the top 10 prospects in the Penguins organization. So we're going to go through some of these names here in the next 15 to 20 minutes and just kind of get Jake's opinion on some of these names that you could see in Pittsburgh as soon as potentially next year. But before we get into that, Jake, we lit off the show talking a little bit about golf because Sam Lafferty swinging the links in Johnstown, about an hour and a half east of Pittsburgh. The question that we ran between the two of us was, who would be in your dream golf foursome if it was made up of solely current or former Pittsburgh Penguins.
Ooh, okay. The hard-hitting stuff. Alrighty.
Yes.
I mean, Sid, of course. I mean, how could you not him just poke his brain? That sounds wonderful. And I'm pretty sure he's a good golfer, right? So he is in there for sure. Jaromir Jagr, of course. I just think I would love to hear more of his stories. He could tell me anything that he tells his girlfriend, because we're about the same age. So, he could have all the stories for me as well. So that would be great. And then looking for two more. I feel like Mario's an easy answer. I feel like I'm gonna get a little bit crazy. I want to get like one of the goons from back in the day. So maybe like a Jay Caulfield or something like that, or someone a little bit wilder from the '90s. But let's give Big J a run, and then let's go OG. Give me like Les Binkley. Multiple generations of Penguins in this foursome.
I was about to say you might need to move up to the old man's tees for Les Binkley at this point, but hey, it all works.
Those are great answers too. I referenced the Lemieux tournament in my answer, so that's a perfect selection there. So I can't argue with those selections.
The question that I have here is about two guys that we asked you about a couple months ago during the trade deadline. You have Ville Koivunen ranked number 2 right now in the Penguins organization, and you have Vasily Ponomarev down there at number 5. To you, what separates these two at this point in time? Because Ponomarev is a guy that has played at the NHL level last year, had a cup of coffee with the Carolina Hurricanes, whereas Koivunen hasn't transitioned over to North America and yet up 3 spots higher, and both of them are considered to be potential prospects to make a push for a roster next year. What do you think is the biggest separating factor between those two and their games?
Yeah, I think really the main reason that I had him ranked a couple of spots higher, he meaning Koivunen, is just the upside once he gets to the NHL. I agree with you 100%. I think Ponomarev probably is going to make an impact sooner at the NHL level, maybe even as soon as the 24 season. But I think Koivunen probably has the higher top 6 potential. I think he just did some really impressive things the past couple of years in the top professional leagues that he was playing in Europe. And I think if he's able to make that transition and collect points in a similar way in the AHL this upcoming year, I mean, it puts him on a great trajectory. The Penguins don't have young top 6 forwards in their system. So I think, I see him really as a 50 to maybe 70 point scorer on the upside if he is able to like reach his potential at the NHL level. But I don't see Ponomarev as being that same having that same offensive ceiling. So I think for me, Koivunen is a little bit higher upside, though we will probably see Ponomarev a little bit sooner. So I think really it's just that playmaking ability that Koivunen has that makes him stand out for me.
It's interesting that Ponomarev could be ready for the NHL pretty much as soon as puck drop on the season. But with that sort of jump, that makes me wonder just where do you see Joel Blomqvist specifically starting this upcoming year? Because does he need more time to sort of stew in the AHL, or is he ready to make that leap? And this essentially boils down to also just how do you see the Penguins goaltending working to start next year?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think he is very close to being NHL ready. I think it's hard to make the argument that someone who has no real NHL experience and is, he's going to be 22 by the time the season starts. Not 100% sure about that, but it's hard to make the argument for me that he is quote unquote NHL ready without having any sort of experience. Do I think he could come in and play? For sure. I mean, the way he played last year for Wilkes-Barre was just outstanding to make that transition from Europe to North America and to just find success immediately. He clearly is going to be a starter to me one day in the NHL. I just don't think it's as soon as 2024, 2025. Having said that, I don't know what the Penguins are really going to do this summer. I mean, Dubas said he's not closing the door on Nedeljkovic. Great. That doesn't mean he's going to come back. And that doesn't mean that Jarry is going to be the guy once puck drop happens in October. So, I think Blomqvist could see NHL action this year. I think ideally I don't want my young 21, 22-year-old prospect with a lot of upside sitting on the bench to start the season. But if there is no backup to Tristan Jarry and for cap reasons, or maybe they pursue other things this summer, if that's where the cap is allocated, then Blomqvist is probably going to find himself in some sort of backup role or maybe working into a timeshare with Tristan Jarry. So I'm not 100% sure. I think he's close. I would love for him to get some call-ups this year in an ideal world, play a significant amount of games in the AHL again, and then in 25, really, that's your shot to contend with him, or for him to contend for a starting job.
The guys we've all talked about so far, they're all guys that, if it doesn't work out in training camp and they don't seem to be ready, they can all go to the American Hockey League level. Koivunen hasn't played there before in his career, other than I believe he might have come over late in a season at one point or other. But outside of that, he doesn't have extended experience at the American Hockey League level. But all three of those players could start the year with the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. But there's one player that I think everybody's thinking about potentially vying for a spot at the NHL level that isn't able to go back to the American Hockey League if he doesn't make the team out of camp, or if he just finds out after 9 games that they're not ready for him, and that's Brayden Yager. Now, the one thing that everybody looks at with Yager is, he's a 200-foot player. He worked on that in his draft year, and now he's brought it all together as he got that offensive numbers back up this past season with Moose Jaw. But what is that biggest area of improvement? Because there's got to be a couple of areas that the Penguins are looking for this summer to say he needs to check these boxes for us to even consider, burning that year in junior and having him at the NHL level. What do you think is the biggest area in need of improvement for Brayden Yager to go from where he's at now, being a Memorial Cup guy, to being a guy that could potentially be on an NHL roster as early as next season?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it's super exciting to have a guy that is as talented as Brayden Yager in the system. I mean, he is just electric, and the fact that he improved his game so much after his post-draft year, I mean, he has real NHL upside. I think the thing that the Penguins want to see between now and training camp is for him to sort of bulk up. The toolkit that he has, the skills part of his game is incredible. He's as close to NHL ready as you want a prospect to be when it comes to the two-way game, applying to it. I mean, he's exciting, and especially his run in the playoffs with Moose Jaw and getting eliminated in the Memorial Cup, you could tell that he was just ready for the next step. So I think what the Penguins want to see is if he's just going to put on that weight and that muscle and turn into that NHL body that can withstand the physicality and the rigor of an NHL season. I think the last official height and weight I saw listed for him, he was about 166. And if he was a player that was 5'8" or 5'9", you could maybe get away with being that small weight wise, but he's going to have to add 15 pounds at least of muscle. So I think that's the biggest thing they want to see, and I think it goes hand in hand with this other aspect that I'm sure the Penguins want to see, is that, is he ready to handle maturity wise a full NHL season? He is just 19. He's a very, very young player. That's a lot of expectations to be the next big draft pick in a system that's been very deprived of them over the last decade. So I think that there's a lot to it that's not just his skill set. So if he's able to, come into training camp and he's added a little bit of muscle, a little bit of weight, and he's in there, I think that tells the Penguins, one, he's taking care of his body in a more mature NHL level manner, and that he's maybe ready to handle an 82 game schedule in the NHL. And if he's not, then, I hope at least he gets 5 to 9 games in a trial basis before he gets sent back to juniors, because I think he's just worth, getting as much experience and exposure with the big club as possible.
Yeah, he'd be a good choice to sort of give that quick jump to right off the jump. That's what I want to see from him, especially if he can add that weight, like you're saying, add that strength and physicality. He could be a useful piece to start the season. If he's good enough to stay, he's good enough to stay. But speaking of good enough to stay, I don't think these two are necessarily considered prospects anymore in Jack St. Ivany and P.O. Joseph. I mean, St. Ivany kind of jumped up as not necessarily a prospect option, but someone who has made noise for himself and is now cracking NHL rosters. I didn't realize they're days apart in age. But since they both sort of recently graduated from that prospect field, just who do you think out of those two will have the biggest impact on the NHL roster next season? Because it seems like Joseph's coming back for sure, and St. Ivany's fighting for a spot, and that third line spot seems like his to lose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to look at what St. Ivany did in those last 15 games whenever he did get called up to Pittsburgh and say that he doesn't deserve to be the bottom pairing right side defender. He brings a totally different element than anyone else in that defensive lineup. He's physical, he's big, and you pointing out the the age difference, quote unquote, between him and P.O. Joseph, I think is like really telling. And it's just kind of indicative of like how large the spotlight is on like first round draft picks, especially defensemen. Like people have been waiting for P.O. Joseph to become the guy for years since he was taken in the first round by Arizona. And he's 24. I think really the reality is that these defensemen take a good amount of time to develop and to become really competent NHL players. And that's why someone like a Jack St. Ivany takes all of this time, coming out of college and then seasoning in the AHL and then making that jump. Having said all that, I think he probably is going to make a bigger contribution. I just think P.O. Joseph is kind of stuck on the left side. I think Marcus Pettersson is the de facto number one left side defenseman. Whether he's playing with Letang or Carlson, he's the guy. Ryan Graves is coming back. And so what are you going to do? Bench him or sit him again to start it off? He just kind of makes too much money, and he was for a time a better player. So you got to hope he finds that again. And I think that just all leaves P.O. Joseph pretty stuck. And so I think it might be a better bet if I was a betting man to look at Jack St. Ivany and pick him to make more of an impact on the Penguins next season.
The one thing you mentioned about St. Ivany is that his development took a little bit longer. They could be patient with Jack St. Ivany because the expectations weren't as high. The expectations are very high for a guy like Sam Poulin, but his development is taking a little bit longer as well. Obviously, some twists and turns that are not typical of a first round pick and what they have to go through. But when you look at his season next year, he got re-signed. If healthy, is he capable of handling those 3C duties in Pittsburgh at some point next year? Because that, at the end of the day, is I think where the Penguins are going to need him to slot in if they want to have that successful bottom six with a lot of young talent. They have some center options in the pipeline, but I feel like he's the one that they're really banking on being ready next year.
If he's going to be in the NHL, it has to be in that third line role. And I gotta be honest, I don't really see him as an everyday third line center just yet. I think he still might be able to be there, but I think he's just still kind of on the cusp of being. I think he's still kind of a tweener between an AHL and NHL guy. He had a great season. He showed significant improvement, and he had a good couple of games whenever he did get called up. So I think he again is showing promise. But I would not feel great if I went into the season with him being the third line center. So I think he has the skill set and the talent to certainly be a third line center, but I would not confidently say that he can be that everyday third line center for the Penguins this upcoming season. I think if I'm making a bet on which upcoming center in the AHL could be that, my bet would be on Ponomarev to be that for 2024 and 2025. Again, I don't think either of them would be the one unless injuries or roster decisions throughout the summer dictate that coming out of camp. But I think Ponomarev is more suited to be that everyday third line center sooner than Sam Poulin is.
So do you think with that in mind that going into the summer, third line center is a position that Dubas needs to address externally instead of trusting that one of these guys are going to emerge, especially early in the season?
Man, that's a great question. I would personally love to see it happen. I think it is. I feel like I have just been clamoring for it for a really long time, and I love Lars Eller, but he's a fourth line center, and I think they just really need someone who is just consistent and can score 20 goals, and like that's it. And they've never been able to fill that. And I think again, Ponomarev could be that guy, but he hasn't shown it at the NHL level. I'd love for them to find that player, but he isn't in the Penguins organization, in my opinion.
Now, a lot of the guys we've talked about are either have already played in North America or are expected to play in North America as early as next season. Two names on your top 10 prospects list, though, number 9 and number 10, respectively, and Sergei Murashov and Mikhail Ilyin, both of them playing overseas as of right now. Do you think there is a timeline that the Penguins have in mind for these guys to come over, or do you think it's right now just let's see how they perform over there and then we'll make that decision years down the road or after next year? Do you think there's any plan as of right now to get those guys over in the coming years before, the end of the Crosby era? Obviously, when you look at a goaltender like Murashev, who could potentially vie with Joel Blomqvist for that future role as a starter.
Yeah, I think, if the parameters are in the Crosby era, I'm going to say that it's unlikely. But, I know Ilian has at least another season on his contract in the KHL. And I think Murashev's deal ended on this past season, but I don't know. Finding the exact contract details is very difficult for me. So I don't expect either of them to be in North America in the next 2 years. I think both of them could absolutely make the NHL team once they are over there. They're really, really exciting players. I wish that we were able to watch them more frequently and that the access to them was more readily available. But I mean, Murashev had another fantastic season in the KHL's second, like their AHL equivalent. He's a freak, and he also got I think 5 or 6 games in the KHL and fared very well. And Ilyin scored, I think it was 12 goals in the KHL this past year as a 19-year-old. So, I'm just impressed. He's not a game-breaking forward. He's probably a third line, second line forward at most. But I mean, if you can score 12 goals in the KHL as a 19-year-old, I think you're a pretty impressive player. So, I think they could make an impact again if the parameters are in the Crosby Malkin era in terms of making an impact. I don't think that's an expectation we should put on either of them. I think the expectation should be, let's get him to Wilkes-Barre by the time Crosby retires. I just think with Russian prospects, it's just always sort of a crapshoot. As much as talented as they are, getting them over here to commit is a difficult thing for a lot of NHL organizations. So we'll see.
It seems like a longer timeline, especially for certain prospects, but we continuously speak highly, the three of us, highly of the pool that the Penguins have built, especially in the last year or so with Kyle Dubas at the helm. Just quite simply, is the Penguins prospect pool better than what a ton of people give it credit for? It's usually near the bottom of those prospect rankings, but the way we discuss it, it sounds pretty solid.
I do think it's better than people think. I mean, is it top 10? No, that would be just like some homer bias. I don't think that's the case, but I think they're probably somewhere between 17 and 25. And I think that's fantastic. That is a significant improvement from being one of the 3 worst prospect systems in the NHL 20 months ago, 24 months ago. So yeah, I think they're a lot better than people think. Again, I might be, someone who's just kind of mesmerized by a player like a Ville Koivunen, but I think he has much more upside than a lot of people talked about whenever they acquired him. I think a lot of people are just sort of overlooking his skill and potential. So I think if they have a player like that who can sort of stick out and make an NHL impact in the next couple of years, aside from Braden Yeager, it'll kind of showcase that their system is a little bit better. But yeah, I think it's, again, it's not much better than people give it credit for, but I think it's better than people give it credit for.
Kyle Dubas will look to add to that, obviously, with the NHL draft coming up here in just a couple months, not to mention the fact that at the NHL Scouting Combine, he continued to reiterate that he's looking to aggressively acquire picks, young prospects, and specifically prospects that could be closer to being ready at the NHL level here than later. But thank you again to Jacob Punturi for joining us and talking a little prospect talk here in the offseason. We're going to have Jake back multiple times, obviously, as the season gets ready for next year. We try to talk about some of these young prospects because, as Kyle Dubas has mentioned, a lot of them could be vying for roster spots as early as this fall. And it'll be interesting if they do. We'll have Jake back on to break down where they're at, what they can do to succeed, and we'll talk a little bit about golf too, as I'm sure all of us are going to go hit the links plenty of times throughout this summer. But one last time, thank you to Jake Punturi for joining the show. You can find him on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Jake_Atsby. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Iceberg. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. We'll see you next time.